everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mara McGinnis, and today I am going to be talking with you about the BBB Standards for Charity Accountability and how meeting them can benefit your nonprofit. Again, my name is Mara McGinnis. I am the director of the Charity Accountability Program for the Education and Research Foundation of the BBB of Metro New York. So I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you today. Some quick housekeeping. I will absolutely be sending the slide deck to you after this webinar has concluded, so there's no reason to take a bunch of notes during this webinar. And if you have any questions at all during this webinar, please feel free to ask me in live time. I am happy to answer those questions. I will be the only one speaking today, so I probably will get to the questions at the end, but it'd be great to have them come in during the webinar. So let's get into it. Again, we are going to be talking today about the Better Business Bureau. And the BBB helps people find businesses and charities that they can trust. The vision for the BBB is an ethical marketplace where buyers and sellers can trust each other. The BBB was founded over 100 years ago, and the IA BBB plus nearly 100 regional BBBs. So today specifically, we're going to be talking about the Metro New York BBB Foundation. And the way that we visualize the foundation is that we visualize being a leader in advancing marketplace trust and upholding and recognizing ethical business and charity standards and practices here in New York. And the way that we do that is we include charity accountability reports, which is what we're going to be mainly speaking about today. But we also have educational programs for charities and business leaders as well as consumers. So for example, today's webinar is one of those educational programs. So we seek to enhance performance and impact. We seek for organizations to meet these high standards and for consumers to detect and prevent frauds. For BBB charity reporting, there are 64 program locations in the BBB system, reporting on about 11,000 international, national, and regional charities, including the National BBB Wise Giving Alliance and the Metro New York BBB. So why does the BBB review and report on charities and charity practices? So businesses and consumers actually asked for it. It began a while back. In the 1920s, we're actually headed into our 100th anniversary. We began doing charity reports. And then about 2001, this is kind of what has come into what we are talking about today and the program that we are speaking about today. So specifically, we are going to be talking about the BBB Standards for Charity Accountability. And these standards were developed by a national panel of experts based on research about donor information needs. So these 20 standards are really categorized into 4 different buckets, really. The governance and oversight of an organization, we review the finances, the measuring effectiveness practices, as well as fundraising and informational communications. There are 3 recommended practices that are not a part of the standards, but are recommended. Those are diversity, pluralism, adherence to the law, and prioritizing open and ethical behavior. So some guiding concepts for the BBB standards, and one that I think really highlights this program is that this is a voluntary disclosure. So the organizations that we do work with on their reports, this is completely on a voluntary basis. We of course are looking at the accuracy of reporting and solicitations. We look to ensure that donors are not misled about any communications that the charities are sending, as well as clarity about use of those donations. Duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, that kind of goes with governance and oversight. So active oversight of the financials, acting in the nonprofit's best interests, in compliance, of course, with law and policies, and focusing on achieving the mission, the nonprofit mission. Those are some guiding concepts for the BBB standards, as well as evaluating key practices. It's important to note that we are not a ratings-based organization. We do not rate a nonprofit organization from A to F. Rather, we have these 20 standards where if you meet all, you are considered BBB accredited. And if you miss a few standards, then you just miss those standards. You are not automatically rated by letter, by number, by star. Generally accepted accounting principles, this is GAAP. I will definitely be saying this a few times. We look at GAAP financials for consistency. So GAAP compliant financial statements are our preferred reference. So this would be like an audit. An IRS Form 990 is not sufficient alone, but as we know, accountability for an organization is definitely more than just financials. So we're going to be talking about financials in part today, but we know that that is not all there is to be said about a nonprofit. So speaking more about BBB charity reports, what is the benefit is a question that we get asked. From the donor's perspective, it's a free, quick way to check if these charities meet high standards. And the BBB seal is this valued charity trust mark that if you are opted into our BBB Charity Seal program, you would have that licensing agreement to use the BBB seal on those fundraising solicitations. If you've never seen a BBB report, I will be showing one shortly. But what is the benefit for charities? What we have is we have these standards, obviously, that we'll be talking about today. We consider these to be helpful key practices. So BBB accreditation is about meeting all of those 20 standards. There is no fee associated with meeting those 20 standards or for developing a report. For the BBB seal, that's a fundraising tool for BBB accredited charities only. It is completely optional, and it includes a licensing and sliding scale fee based on public revenue. I'll be speaking about that later, but I just want to clarify a bit about the benefit. So if you've never seen a BBB charity report, this is one on your screen. This is what one would look like. You can see all of the green check marks that indicate that this organization, this charity who meets all, they have met all 20 standards. So some conclusions, the programs, the governance, and the fundraising methods used, as well as the related contributions spent on fundraising. This is all what we consider to just kind of be a quick snapshot to show a donor or anyone who might be interested in more information about your charity some quick facts about it. Of course, we do have the financial snapshot as well. This comes directly from your audited financial statements. This shows your source of funds, your income, your expenses, and where they're categorized, as well as your total net assets at the end. So some BBB charity accountability general areas of focus. It's important to know that these are just a general area of focus, right? So any eligible organization requesting a BBB charity report, we are certainly happy to work with you, but we're really looking at organizations that are publicly soliciting donations, including government grants. So we're really looking at organizations who are soliciting funds from the public. Really what our mission is, again, is to really be that trust and that mediator between a nonprofit and the donors. So organizations that are in the news or otherwise of interest to the public, again, that really aligns with our mission. So we're focusing on larger charities collecting greater share of dollars in business for 3+ years, but again, we may evaluate smaller organizations. So if this doesn't really sound like your organization, but you're interested in developing that charity report, please feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to work with you and to take a look at your organization to see if this could be a good fit. So before jumping into the standards 1 through 5 specifically about governance, when we're talking about the standards, really what my focus here today with you is to talk about the standard, why we consider it to be important, and in some cases, the implementation of that standard. So if there's anything that is unclear, I will certainly take my time with you today, but I can't get into all of the nitty-gritty of every standard. So if you have any specific questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or type your question as you have them. Okay, great. So standard 1 today, we are going to be talking about governance and oversight. And this standard is created to ensure that the board of directors is providing an adequate oversight of charity operations. There are some parts of standard 1 that work in tandem with the New York State law. So if anything that you're seeing on this standard in particular might be a little unclear, definitely feel free to ask me, but there are some specific guidelines from New York State. So if you are unclear about that, I would certainly advise speaking with them or looking over their website and their resources to make sure that you have what you need on your end. So when we're talking about financial controls and that adequate oversight of charity operations, we're talking about financial controls first, right? We're talking about making sure that the board is formally approving your budget, that they're monitoring the conflict of interest policy, reviewing written fundraising contract and expenses, voting board member overseeing financials. So this would be like a treasurer, a head of an auditing committee. We'll speak a little bit more about what a treasurer does, but making sure there is a board member dedicated to that. Receiving and reviewing 990s, financial statements, the management letter that comes with that audit, and the regular CEO performance review that the board does. Again, there is these New York State law like whistleblower policy or related party transactions. We would advise that you speak or that you use the resources from New York State when you're looking at this standard. So standard 1, there was an update in 2019. We now include a board oversight element requiring that the organization complies with applicable government charity regulations. So again, if you have any questions about that, please definitely seek those materials out with the Charities Bureau. We also wish to call your attention to the updated disclosure requirements for solicitation of charitable contributions. So if you are unfamiliar with that, again, taking a look at this charitiesnys.com. Standard 1 is very lengthy, I should say. They're not all this long. Standard 2, for example, is quite shorter. We're looking for a board of directors with a minimum of 5 voting members. We do this because we want to ensure that there is some diversity of thought at the table. So standard 3 is the board meeting standard. This was actually the most missed standard of 2020. So I'm happy to kind of speak with you about what we're looking for to make sure it's clear. And if you have any questions about your board meeting attendance, happy to answer them. So what we're looking for here is a minimum of 3 evenly spaced full board meetings per year with a majority in attendance. So when we say a majority in attendance, we're talking about 50%. So if let's say that you have 5 board meetings a year and there wasn't the best participation in 2 of those, that's fine. What we'd actually be looking for is the 3 with the highest attended if there are more board meetings. So presenting us with the highest attended board meetings with at least 50% in attendance would have you meeting the standard. So of course, during the pandemic, COVID, and even beyond, if you have decided that using Zoom or Teams is a really good method for your board specifically, face-to-face does include that. So we're looking at Zoom and go to webinar, Teams. If you can all see and hear one another, we consider this to be face-to-face. 1 phone conference call is allowed at 3 of those board meetings. So when we're talking about face-to-face and why we think that this is really important, we've all been on a conference call. We have all seen, if you just mute yourself and then you might be checking your email, we want to make sure that the board is actively engaged during these board meetings. So teleconference, where all board members can see and hear each other, that's counted as face-to-face. But again, if you have 1 phone conference, this can be allowed out of these 3 board meetings. So I'm getting a question now. What does 2 out of 3 meetings mean? Okay, so when we're talking about the 3 meetings, let's say you have a meeting in January, June, and December, what we're looking for is we're looking for 2 of those meetings to at least be face-to-face. 1 can be a conference call. So if that wasn't clear, I hope that clarifies for you. But most organizations that we work with, it is all face-to-face. There are rarely 1 conference call, but if you are an organization that does have audio conference calls only, so that's just by the phone, that does count as 1 of those board meetings. So 3 out of 3 meetings could be by Zoom. If there is a conference call, the other 2 need to be video. That is exactly right, and I'm glad that you asked that question. All right, moving forward. Standard 4 has to do with board compensation, and what we're looking for is not more than 1 or 10%, whichever is greater, directly or indirectly compensated persons may be serving as a voting member of the board. Compensated persons should not be the board chair or treasurer, and the chair must not be someone performing the role of CEO or COO, whether or not he or she is compensated. So when we're looking at board compensation, we are relying on the 990, and we are relying on you to indicate to us if any of your board members are compensated either directly or indirectly. A board chair may never serve the role of the treasurer, and compensated or uncompensated senior executives may not serve as chair of the same organization's board if they supervise paid or unpaid staff members or perform functions that would usually be attributable to CEO or COO. Really, the easiest way to say that is even if your CEO is an uncompensated person, maybe they don't even have the title of CEO or executive director, but they kind of play that role. We want to make sure that they are not as well the chair or the treasurer. And the reason why we want this is we want there to be an arm's length distance between these two roles. Both of these roles should be performed by two separate people. Standard 5 is related party transactions. Again, this is another standard where there are certainly very clear and distinct New York State laws surrounding conflict of interest in related party transactions. I really advise you to seek those out if you have any questions about this. But Standard 5 is looking for no transactions in which any board or staff members have material conflicting interest with the charity resulting from any relationship or business affiliation. So factors to be considered is whether interested parties participated in a board vote, if competitive bids were sought, size and duration of the transaction, whether the transaction is one-time or ongoing. I don't want to provide specific examples about what a board might look like if there is a related party transaction, but if you do have a board member who does provide services and they are the owner or associated with a business, would certainly seek out the New York State laws surrounding this. So standard 6 and 7 has to do with measuring effectiveness. This was tied for the second most missed standard of 2020. So I want to go over this with you. This is, of course, something that comes up quite a bit. So I hope to gain some clarity with you today about it. Standard 6 is having a measuring effectiveness policy. And it might not be called a measuring effectiveness policy, but what we're looking for is for a board policy of assessing no less than every 2 years the organization's performance and effectiveness, and of determining future actions required to achieving its mission. So when we're looking at this, this might be called a strategic plan that is reviewed at least once every 2 years. This might be called the year in review. Anything that indicates that you are looking at the organization's performance and effectiveness and determining future actions required to achieving its mission. And you might say, and I hear this quite a bit from organizations, that you are doing this every single board meeting. And of course, we're all doing this. We're all looking at the organization on a month-to-month basis, even a day-to-day basis, but making sure that you're really dedicated to having this as a practice. It is board approved. So no matter turnover of senior executives at your organization, this is a practice that continues no matter turnover. So what does Standard 6 call for? So the policy in place should provide that the organization has clearly identifiable and measurable goals and objectives. So that includes a process to evaluate the success of impact of your programs to fulfill the mission. And it's important to note that we do not judge the process or the results of your assessment. So you might have this policy and you might go through this assessment and decide that there are some programs that are failing, but there are some programs that are thriving. We are not here to say what is right and what is wrong. What we want to make sure is that you have a policy, that you are committed to this practice, and that you are having a way to evaluate the success or impact of your programs. So if you have any questions about that, of course, I definitely suggest reaching out to me independently. I just got a question, will you be sending this slide deck? Yes, I will. I will be sending this slide deck to the email in which you registered for this event. So if you don't receive an email from me, definitely feel free to reach out. So Standard 7 with the written report, this kind of works with the policy, and I'll specify why. So when you do the assessment, what we're looking for is to ensure that along with that, there is a written report component that goes along to the board. So we want to make sure that the board is reviewing and approving the written report outlining the results of the effectiveness assessment and recommendations for future actions. So the strategic plan performance evaluations may qualify if they meet these criteria. So if you are sharing the assessment results with the board, that includes the written report. Again, this is not something that we're looking to see because we do not judge the outcome of this process. So the impact reporting tool optional use for Standard 7. So if you're unclear about kind of how to develop this report and how to share it with the board, here are some 5 questions that you might want to look into, which is, what is your organization aiming to accomplish? What are your strategies for making this happen? What are your organization's capabilities for doing this? How will your organization know if you are making progress? What have and haven't you accomplished so far? So if you're stuck kind of creating this report, definitely feel free to utilize this resource. So moving on to financial standards 8 through 14. Standard 8, 9, and 10, these are the only financial standards that set target spending ratios. So when we're talking about ratios, we're of course talking about the overhead of your organization. So what we have done with GuideStar and Charity Navigator, we put together this resource that indicates to the donors of America and the nonprofits of America, we want to ensure that the overhead of your organization is shared transparently. It is not something to hide or to be ashamed of. It is something to be shared so donors understand that there is overhead that is usually and typically needed to make an operation run on a day-to-day basis. So when we're talking about that, we understand again that the financials isn't everything when it comes to your organization. By itself, the overhead ratio is not really a great indicator of a nonprofit performance. Other factors of this matter, such as transparency, governance, leadership, and results. So we hope that our standards kind of include that approach to ensure that all of these factors are being considered and it's not just financials alone. We, of course, think that charities should keep overhead spending reasonable in proportion to mission costs, but sharing that is just a great way to kind of build that trust with your donor. So why is this important? As of April 2021, 94% of Metro New York BBB evaluated charities did meet program and fundraising ratios. 6% or fewer did not meet them. So we have found that the goals that we have set in these ratios that we have put for 8, 9, and 10, they are reachable for 94% of the organizations that did submit with us. Are you going to define what constitutes overhead? Yes, I will be sharing those ratios with you in just a bit. So standard 8, program expenses are 65% or more. So when we're looking at your financial statements, broken down by program versus total expenses, we're taking your total program expenses at the top, right? Dividing it by total expenses, and we should at least see that 65% of your total expenses are spent on programs. So there's some recent issues in terms of misunderstanding what is and isn't a quote unquote program expense. It is unclear or inaccurate reporting, including lack of clarity about fundraising affiliate relationships. So if you do have any questions about what constitutes a program expense, I really suggest speaking to your auditor or your accounting team about that. So we're talking about the overhead, we are talking about fundraising and administrative expenses. So when we're breaking these down, those are a few standards to come, but I did want to clarify that right off the bat, that fundraising is what we consider to be, or what is considered to be, an overhead expense because it is outside of a program expense. So 35% or less of related contributions spent on fundraising. This is standard 9. What we're looking for here is that your total fundraising expense divided by your total related contributions at most should be 35% or less. And a really quick way to define this is, does it take 35 cents to raise $1 or does it take less? If it takes 35 cents or less to raise that dollar, you would be meeting standard 9. So the denominator is total related contributions generated by fundraising expense. So if that's unclear, what we're talking about today is your related contributions through fundraising efforts. So we're looking again at your public revenue, which includes, but is not limited to, donations from individuals, private and corporate funders, donated goods, special events revenue, bequest government grants, not contracts, important to specify, in-kind contributions, and member dues. So a question just came up, what contributions would be considered unrelated to fundraising efforts? That's a great question. Some that we would see would be something like your the fees from your programs. Let's say that you charge for program fees. That would be typically considered something that is not a fundraising revenue. Something like any gains that you have made on an investment, that would not consider most times, and I want to clarify, most times that would not be considered a related contributions. A government contract, that would not be considered a related contribution, but a government grant might be. So there are some examples of what would be some revenue generated that is not specifically contribution. Really what we're looking for here is money that's coming in, that's typically a donation that is given to you to say, this is your money that was raised from a fundraising effort. So if you have any questions in terms of your audit, feel free to ask any specific questions. This is actually an exciting thing for me to talk about, so I'd be happy to share that with you. So standard 10 is our last ratio. We're looking at the accumulation of funds, and this one is a pretty specific one too. What we're looking for is that your unrestricted net assets available for use are less than 3 times your last year's expenses or 3 times the size of your current year's budget. We're talking about the unrestricted net assets in your audit. We're not talking about your fixed assets, which could be land, building, and equipment. We're talking about the unrestricted net assets that are available for use at any time. And if you're thinking that you might be in a lucky position to have 3 times your last year's expenses or 3 times the size of your current year's budget in unrestricted net assets, you actually can meet this standard. So if you are over this limit, you can meet the standard by complying with disclosure requirements in direct mail or marketing appeals and websites. And again, I try to explain to you in each standard, why we consider this to be important. And this one is a really important one. Unless informed otherwise, donors do expect that their contributions will be spent on current programs. This has been confirmed in public survey research. So when a donor does give you a donation or a gift, they do expect that you will be using that donation. So full disclosure ensures that donors will not be misled. And of course, that is something that is of utmost importance to us. Standard 11 is about availability. So making available upon request complete annual financial statements prepared in order with generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP. So currently New York State requires an audit if you're bringing in $750,000 or more for fiscal years ending in June 30th, 2021. So if you have any questions about that threshold, you might have been under it or you might have been over it, definitely feel free to go to charitiesnys.com to get a full resource of what they are looking for if you're over $750,000 for fiscal year until June 30th. Standard 12, and I will be discussing this quite a bit. We're looking to ensure that your programs, fundraising, and admin are all broken down. So if your organization has multiple programs, we ask that those are also broken down by category. And there are plenty of organizations that have spanning programs that do have some relevance to each other. Some are distinctly different than others. So again, if you have any questions about that, if it's something specific, I definitely advise seeking information out about that. But when we're looking at an audit, we are typically looking for your program, fundraising, and administrative expenses to be broken down. A functional breakdown of expenses can look like this. If you have multiple programs, you can see that we have the functional expenses, program A, B, fundraising, and admin. And we're also looking at the natural classifications to see how these are all broken down and the way that these costs are attributable. So your salaries, your travel, your postage, all of these natural classifications should be included in your audit. Financial statements should provide a breakdown of expenses that will show amounts allocated to programs, fundraising, and administration. We also do ask that this is include other places too, which we'll be discussing as we move forward. I have been receiving really good questions and some specific questions that I'm not able to answer right off right off the top of my head. That will require a little bit of thinking. So if I'm not answering your question right now, do know I will certainly be emailing you after this with the answer to that question. But keep asking them. I love answering them. So why is it important to functionally break down your expenses? Well, first, we think it's a critical management tool for staff and board. We think it tells an important financial story to funders and stakeholders about how donations are used. And also there's a FASB update, expenses reporting by nature and function required in statement of activities, schedule, and functional expenses are now in effect of all nonprofits under GAAP. So the IRS Form 990 also asks for these to be separated functionally. So we do think it's an important thing to have in your audit as well. Standard 13, we are looking for the accurate reporting of the organization's expenses under joint cost allocations. So some problems kind of include, and some eyebrows are raised if there's a claim such as incorrectly claiming that there's zero fundraising expenses, misunderstandings of the true amount a charity spends on fundraising. Again, this is all kind of relates to that overhead myth. So ensuring that what you're saying about your fundraising expenses is clear, is evident, and can be provided to the BBB to ensure that that is being shown accurately. Standard 14 is the last of our financial standards. The standard has to do with the budget, and we asked for this budget to be board approved. And if you were taking notes or you have a really good memory, you'll remember that this was also asked in standard 1 when the board is looking at the budget and making sure they are approving the budget. And they must contain the projected expenses, again broken down by program, fundraising, and administration expenses broken out. So it's really similar to the financial statements and according to standard 12, but we don't ask, if you have it, great, but we don't ask for the natural classifications for your budget. So that salary, the postage, all of those line items that are really down to like the nitty gritty, down to the last dollar of where those can be attributed. Really what we're looking for is just the totals for your program, fundraising, and administrative expenses for the current operating year. So if you look up on the screen, an example of a budget that would not meet BBB standards, these are all natural classifications. So it's unclear to me, and I can't quite specify where, you know, insurance is going, rent is going, telephone is going, all of these expenses. I really want to make sure that I am seeing the program, fundraising, and administration expenses projected for the year. So an example of a budget that would actually meet our standard would be something like this on your screen. We see the program services, and we see that it is broken down by multiple programs. So if you are breaking down by multiple programs on your audit, we will expect to see that in your budget as well. We see that the supporting services are also broken down by fundraising and administrative expenses. Sometimes we'll just get a supporting services number that is the fundraising and admin costs are embedded in that supporting services. We are looking for those to be broken down. If you don't have a budget, this is a really great resource that you can use. It's called strongnonprofits.org, and I really suggest looking into that if you have decided that you might want to do something a bit different. It is August. I can't believe that we are somehow getting close to the end of the year, but I know that we are all starting to look at our budget, think about our wish list, think about how we want to move forward in 2022. So that concludes the financial standards. We will now be moving on to the fundraising standards. Again, this is kind of like the bread and butter of what the BBB does, which is looking at the claims that are being made by an organization, specifically in their solicitations, and ensuring that all of this information is accurate, complete, and transparent. So standard 15 is just that. We require that all solicitations and informational materials that are distributed by any means be accurate, truthful, and not misleading, both in whole or in part. So you might be wondering, what is a solicitation? That could be anything from a direct mail appeal, that could be an e-blast, that could be a Facebook post, that could be a call that you might make, that could be an event that you're having. There are so many different types of solicitations, And what we require in all of them is a full, accurate disclosure and written and graphic representations of your charity. So we would ask that all stories and photos are up to date and accurate, key facts relevant to the donations are disclosed, financial and success statistics are accurate. So for example, if you're going to be saying that 91% of your expenses go directly toward programs, we would need to verify that on your latest financial statement to ensure that that ratio is accurate. So claims about your program success, things like this, we're definitely looking to ensure that all of this is accurate. We want to make sure that we're protecting donors, and we also want to make sure that we're protecting the organizations. So if you're explaining clearly how funds will be used, we just ask that there's a way to substantiate these claims. So for example, a red flag might say 100% of your gift will go toward, maybe let's say that it will go directly to a cat named Ruby, right, at the animal shelter, and there's a photo of Ruby. Is it 100% of your gift will be going to Ruby, or cats like Ruby? So we're making sure that these claims are able to be substantiated. Standard 16 is your annual report. So we ask that you have an annual report available for use upon request. That includes the following. That includes your mission statement, summary of your past year's program results, roster of officers and members of the board, as well as financial information. So your total income for the prior year, expenses broken down to, you guessed it, program admin and fundraising categories, as well as your ending net assets. Your annual report, especially in the year 2021, especially in the year during the COVID-19 pandemic, I am not anticipating that organizations are really shelling out for super glossy, expensive publications that are mailed to donors. Really what we're looking for is anything that could be an online digital report, completely acceptable, that includes what we're looking for in terms of, again, the mission, program, financial, and the board information. So what wouldn't qualify for this would be your website details that cannot be printed or sent as a document when requested. So let's say that you have your financials on your website on one page, your board on another page, your program impact on another page. If you have to really kind of bounce around, that's not considered to be an annual report. But let's say, for example, all of the information is on one page on your website. If that could be printed and mailed to a donor who requests it offline, that is definitely, that qualifies for an annual report. It's important to know as well that your 990 can be your annual report if it includes the program service accomplishments. So we all know that your 990 asks for your mission, your board, and your financial information, but it does have that Schedule O, and on that page 2, it gives you the opportunity to speak directly to a donor to say, this is what we did last year, this is how many people we served, this is the success of our program. That would be considered a program service accomplishment. Some organizations take advantage of this space in their 990, some don't. But if you are an organization that does take advantage of that, I think personally, I think it's great. And two, that is able to be used as your annual report. So website disclosures kind of goes with your annual report, but here we're looking for an organization to have the materials on the website, including all information from your annual report, your mailing address or a PO box, or and an electronic access to your most recent 990 with the appropriate labeled link. So of course, this only applies if an organization solicits donations by any means on their website. But again, in the year 2021, most organizations do request and solicit for donations on their website. But if you are unsure what that might mean, if that's requests mailed contributions, accepting contributions electronically, or asks donors to call in or text a contribution, that includes a call to action to solicit. So if you have your annual report on your website that meets Standard 16, you have the mailing address and your 990, you're done. That meets Standard 17. And of course, why we consider this to be important, we want to ensure that donors have all of the information that they can to really make that wise giving choice for them. So your privacy policy. We want to ensure that we are addressing the privacy concerns of donors. And one way that we ask for this is in the form of a privacy policy. So we're looking for a clear and accessible privacy policy link on any website that includes what information is being collected and how it will be used, how to contact the charity to review and correct information, how to tell charities not to share personal information outside the organization, and what security measures are in place. And this sounds very technical, and in some part, it is pretty technical. So if you do not have a privacy policy on your website, or you're unclear about if that would meet this standard, this is a really good checklist of what we're looking for and how we address those privacy concerns of donors. So if your organization is one that does share information with third parties, we want to ensure that donors have the ability to opt out of that. And if there is no option to opt out of that in the form of, let's say, a check mark, ensuring that at least once a year they are made aware that their information is being collected and shared with third parties, and giving them the option to opt out. And we really suggest and recommend that it's just in the form of a check mark. So if you would like to consult with any resources about your privacy policy, we definitely suggest the following links that will be sent to you later. Standard 19 has to do with cause-related marketing. So if you're an organization that participates in cause-related marketing, you know that this is when a nonprofit and a for-profit work together to find that mutual benefit from a consumer sale or transaction. So this is, again, one of those standards that really does work in tandem with the New York State law. So if you are participating in cause-related marketing, I would highly suggest consulting with the Charities Bureau about Standard 19. But what we're looking for in Standard 19 is we're looking for organizations that do have these appeals and do have these solicitations. We want to make sure, again, number one concern is that donors have all of the information in front of them to make a wise giving choice. So that includes including the actual or anticipated portion of purchase price to benefit the charity, the duration of the campaign, any maximum or guaranteed minimum amount, or any other limitations as it pertains to this transaction. So an example that would meet Standard 19 is 5 cents will go to ABC Charity for every bottle of juice sold in April 2021, up to a maximum of 500,000. So this really includes so much about where the money will be going, but per the New York Attorney General, there are some specifics. So I definitely suggest heading to this link if you do participate. And to wrap up our standards, I'm cautious of the time, it's 1:43, so there will certainly be some time for questions. Charities must respond promptly to complaints brought by a local BBB or the Wise Giving Alliance. So if we do receive a complaint against an organization, we would anticipate that that charity respond to us promptly, addressing the concerns of the consumer who brought that forward to them and addressing their concerns. So to wrap this up, we are going to be talking a bit about the top 10 BBB standards. I did bring them up a few times, and I just wanted to kind of end this by saying that the number one, again, is board meetings. We're hoping that Zoom actually helps organizations. We'll see kind of the results of that from 2021 and beyond. But we hope that being able to see and hear each other is actually easier than ever using Zoom. So no matter where your board member might be, they would have the ability to log in and participate in a meaningful way at your board meetings. So the effectiveness policy and the effectiveness reporting, those kind of are hand in hand. So having the policy and also sharing the results of that assessment with the board, that includes the effectiveness reporting. And in Standard 10, just kind of to wrap up the top 3, the unrestricted ending net assets. So if you do, again, have 3 times your past year's expenses or 3 times your current year's budget in your unrestricted net assets available for use, disclosing that is really important to show donors that you're really being transparent with them about where you anticipate their fund and their gift to be going. So a list of the standards, in case you just can't get enough, would be here, as well as the implementation guide. I covered a bit about how to implement each standard by charity, but of course, there is there is other ways to describe implementing, and definitely things that would take longer than an hour. So feel free to look up that resource. The disclosure process. For this and for speaking with you, I would suggest just emailing me directly if you would like to become a BBB accredited charity, if you would like to submit your organization to develop that report. It is free of charge. There's no cost associated with creating that BBB charity report, and I'd be happy to help you with it. Again, I reference this a million times and I can't reference it enough. Charitiesnys.com. If you have any questions about regulatory information or guidance, please definitely seek this out. The Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, significant new guidance and changes about financial reporting for nonprofits. Feel free to seek this out, as well as anything to do with the New York State nonprofit regulations. And if you meet all 20 standards, you are automatically considered an accredited charity. There is no cost for that BBB charity report development and BBB accreditation without seal use. So you have the option and you have the ability to opt into the BBB Charity Seal Holder Program. If you are a BBB accredited charity, this can be used on your solicitations and websites, licensing fee and agreement. Only BBB accredited charities may join this optional program. And I saw a question come in. Do you know how much it costs for the licensing accreditation? I can't unfortunately tell you what that would be because again, that's on a sliding scale based on your public revenue. So if you would like to share your information with me via email, that would also include probably your latest audit for the most available and updated fee of what that would be. Definitely feel free to share that with me over email. There would be no obligation to go through the process, but I would be happy to help in any way I can to share that information with you. So if you are opted into that seal program, here's an example of what it might look like on your website to have that BBB seal, and you can see it right on the report here. You can see that they are an accredited charity and they meet all of those 20 standards. Okay, well that concludes our webinar. I had so much fun talking with you today and answering all of your questions. Keep them coming. I will be staying on this webinar for a few more minutes to see if any questions come in. But if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Again, I will be sending out an e-blast either by end of day today or tomorrow. That includes the slide deck, the recording, and also all of the necessary and helpful resources that were listed in this webinar that you might not have had a chance to click on as you were intensively listening to it. So again, I thank you. If you have any questions, I will be staying on for a few more minutes, but if not, feel free to have a wonderful Wednesday, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and that you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you so much. All right, it doesn't seem that I have any questions coming in, so feel free to shoot me an email if you think of one later. Take care. Bye.